Hi, welcome to another episode of the Financial Freedom Podcast. I'm Steve Richardson, a bankruptcy attorney trying to keep people on their path to financial stability and independence through education. Financial literacy is an important part of anyone's education and it should start before the student graduates from high school. In episode 151, I talked with Jake Cousineau on how he teaches it to high school students. But this is a topic that needs to be discussed more. That's why in this episode of the podcast, I talk with Aaliyah Kissick about her efforts to promote financial literacy, especially among the Gen Z. My guest today is Aaliyah Kissick, an American actress, beauty queen, entrepreneur, and financial literacy advocate. Raised in Athens, Illinois, she attended Lincoln Land Community College, where she earned an associate's degree in business administration and a bachelor's degree in agricultural and consumer economics with a focus on financial planning at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. At 17 years old, Aaliyah started her small business, AK Boutique, with just $50 and a lot of imagination. Utilizing online resources and personal finance books, she transformed her life and developed a passion for personal finance. After studying the subject in college, she decided to give back by increasing financial wellness through making conversations about money more accessible. As Miss Illinois United States last year, she championed financial literacy advocacy and dedicated over 100 hours of community service and financial education. And this was to students K through 12. Afterwards, she founded the Financial Literacy Diaries, a media company dedicated to closing the adult financial education gap. Welcome to the show, Aaliyah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I think it's going to be a great conversation based on your background, as I just indicated to our listeners. Must be have been quite a life path from you. Uh, Tell us a little bit initially about that path from beauty queen to financial literacy.
Yeah. So I started in the talent industry. We had a little conversation about that before the episode when I was 11. I
Mm-hmm.
started as a commercial actress and I started doing pageants. So I continued down that path. I competed at the junior teen level at Miss United States in 2016. And in 2017, I decided that I wanted to start a small business, AK Boutique, in part because I had modeling experience. And I realized that if I modeled clothing for other people, I would get a small percentage of the profit from selling the items. But then if I created my own business, I could get 100% of the profit from selling the items that I modeled. So that was some of the rationale behind it. There was a lot of things that went into the random day that I decided to start a business. But that is one of the elements to that. So I started the business. I originally was not planning to go to college, and then I won a raffle scholarship through my school at Athens High School, which covered two classes at my local community college. So I decided to go. I fell in love with it and continued to study business administration. When I was studying business administration, it was a really general education track, and I realized that through running my business and taking some of the courses that I really loved the personal finance and small business financial management side of the degree. And so when I went on to get my bachelor's degree, there was a little bit of serendipity. I didn't quite choose the program for financial planning, but I was placed in it and I didn't even realize it was a major. It was the most incredible discovery that I could study what I'm passionate about full time, and I got my bachelor's degree from there. In the meantime, I also applied and got accepted to Gee's College of Business's Masters of Science of Management program, which I am currently completing. And because it's online, I actually got to do that while I was finishing up my pageant title earlier this year.
Mm-hmm. So are you still running AK Boutique or have you moved
Yes, it's
on from
online now. One of the things that happened in the process of becoming an adult is I got married.
that?
And
Oh,
yeah, I got married. I met my husband on campus, and so I was planning to reopen my store in person after I graduated with my bachelor's degree, but I married him 2 months after I graduated. And now we moved across the country. So I'm running that business online and in now the state of Virginia as opposed to the state of Illinois. And it's such a blessing. We're in the process of completely revamping the website, in response to the fact that it is going to be a predominantly online organization now. But that's absolutely one thing that I love about being a business owner is that flexibility. Like I could get married and I could move across the country on short notice. You can actually see my little boutique that I'm working on. I have a little photography section behind me. I get to do that wherever I want. And because of that, I was able to marry my husband. And whenever he was offered a really nice job, we could just move on a whim. It was fabulous.
Well, certainly the way the world has changed since the pandemic, and really it was changing before that, with the ability to work remotely and not being in a traditional office or in a brick and mortar building. It gives a lot more flexibility on the one hand for people that they can work from anywhere, but also it's become a lot more competitive for jobs because the pool of prospects has gotten much bigger.
For
Uh,
sure, yeah. And recently there was a Washington Post article that essentially stated the trend is that people are going to start returning to the office. And I think that's a really good opportunity for entrepreneurship. Like if you don't want to go back to the office, it's maybe time to consider setting up your own shop. So that's one thing that we thought about. My husband was happy to return to the office, and I love it because I get the house to myself during the day. I can run my business. I can work on creating those free financial education resources, and he comes home after like 6 or 7 p.m. and everything is very peaceful. So I'm happy with it. I had a brick and mortar store from the ages of 18 to 20. I was 20 when the pandemic hit. And I had some very interesting life decisions during the COVID-19 time. I actually enlisted at that point. So I served in the military for 3 years. And that's a big reason why my brick and mortar, I temporarily, I thought, closed it down because in addition to being in college, I was also in the National Guard and I was an ROTC for a little bit. And so running the business online was a great way that I could also serve my country while still managing the business. I medically retired last year. And so there's so many moving pieces, and having an online business has been one great way to continue to supplement my income. And I can scale up and scale down as needed.
Well, that's another amazing part of this journey you've been on, not just with being a beauty queen and an actress and going to school, but you also served our country in the National Guard, right?
Yes, yes.
And you were in there. What was your term of service? 3 years,
Three
or
years. I did 3 years and I think like 2 extra months, but it's 3 years.
what was your MOS? What did you do in the National Guard?
74 Delta. I was Seaburn.
I'm sorry, you were what?
Seaburn, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear.
Oh, okay. I never heard of that acronym before. CBRN. Okay.
No worries. They used to be separate MOSs, and at some point they combined all of them. So we do chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear. For the most part, what that MOS does, it's a lot of education and safety. So it's our responsibility to make sure that people realize that chemical warfare is a threat and that the gas masks are actually effective. We run the gas chamber, and that's really fun. That was one of my favorite parts of being in the guard was getting to run the gas chamber. But yeah, we do a lot of cool stuff. We also learn the radiological mapping. We're prepared for readiness in case the worst case scenario does happen. But everyone
Mhm.
jokes about CBRN being not really a relevant MOS because we don't really have chemical workers since the Geneva Convention. But I do think it's really important to have that education side. And that could actually be where my passion for education developed because that was the first time that I was really in an educational role other than modeling and acting training.
Well, certainly, I would think that background and what we do with CBRN helped with the Iraq War because you had someone, a leader of a nation that was, threatening to use chemical and biological weapons and that
I
type of.
wasn't around for that. I'm only 24 now, so 3 years of service, I was not around for that. That is definitely relevant, but that I'm not trying to have any I was not part of the Iraq War.
Making me feel old here. But my point is that you're right. We don't have any of these types of weapons, but I think it's important that we know how to defend against them.
The education component, the awareness, and the safety is extremely important, yes.
Oh, absolutely. So it seems to a great extent your journey has been sort of learning by doing. I mean, you started a business at 17. You you really can't run a successful business without having some financial literacy. So you learned financial literacy from by doing, by creating this business, and by going to school, which taught you a love of it, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I remember the first step of learning my business, and I did not have any business knowledge, so I had no idea what any of these words meant at the time. I developed it over time, but I had to learn operations first, right? So I had to figure out how to get the inventory, how to get the inventory in a sales channel, which was my mom's garage. I had to figure out how to market it, which was holding a sign. And then once I got that down, I started figuring out how to create new sales channels. So I was going around to different pop-ups. I was partnering with other already established small businesses and putting like a small rack in there and paying rack rent. And at that point, that's when I actually started making money. It took me about 4.5 months to get that figured out. So pretty much all of summer break. And by August, I was starting to see positive amounts in my bank account. So that was very exciting. I spent a lot of time, but because I put in the time and the sweat equity, I really didn't spend much money out of pocket. So the risk for me was maybe, I think, $200 over the whole summer, which as a 17-year-old, you can make back pretty quickly with a traditional job. It was very low risk. And in the long run, it turned into a very high reward endeavor for me. So once I had the money, though, I didn't know what to do with it because I'm like, okay, how do I make this into even more money? I wanted to scale up a little bit to make money faster. And that's when I started listening to those online podcasts and looking up education resources. But one thing that I noticed when I was doing this is it was really time consuming to find all of this stuff and to sort through all of the jargon and the get rich quick mentality and the outdated advice. As an 18-year-old at the time, 17, 18, I could kind of tell when things were a little bit outdated, but whenever you grow up with that material, something that is ubiquitous whenever you're entering the workforce, and this information is still being taught. It's not the 1980s anymore. Some of it's not relevant. I was able to see it wasn't relevant, but maybe someone who's entering their financial literacy journey a little bit older is not able to do that. So that's some of the challenges that I came across when I was going through things. But because I was so young, I had basically all the time in the world, and I was able to navigate everything and turn it into a successful business.
Well, and I think that that transitions us into my next question. As I understand it, that journey that you just described is what was the impetus for you creating the Financial Literacy Diaries, right? You were going to say, all
Yes.
right, you don't have to go around scouring the internet trying to find this information. I got you covered. I've already found it. Here it is, right?
Yeah, yeah. So there's a little bit more to like the adventure of getting there. I decided in my senior year of college, have you ever heard of a quarter life crisis? I had like a quarter life crisis when I realized that I was getting a little bit older, and so I decided to enter pageantry one more time. I competed and then won at the state level for Miss Illinois. I was Miss Illinois United States 2023. I had to use a platform. I've always been passionate about literacy, and my platform in the past was literacy and underprivileged community. And I realized that I could use that degree I was pursuing in the financial planning realm to create a financial literacy campaign. So I went through to different schools, K through 12, started talking about financial literacy, and some of the teachers were just amazed. They're like, I wish I learned this in school. I find it really difficult to teach this stuff because I don't know if I have that strong of a grip on it. And to be fair, I don't think we do expect second grade teachers to be talking about money on a regular basis. So it's not the expectation, but they wanted to. And at that point, after my pageant title had ran its course, I decided that I wanted to create something for adults as well, because it starts with an educated, financially literate adult population in order to reach the next generation of children. And I do plan eventually to create resources not only for individual adult education, but also resources that educators can use for free so that they can teach their students as well. So that's the path that I want to go down. And watching people finally understand things that they've seen talked about in the news or explained in an article, that was magical to me. And I think that creating the narrative around it, making it into a story, something relatable to a specific population, and not only using sports analogies is really important to creating a comprehensive adult education program.
So is the Financial Literacy Diaries, is that mainly aimed towards young adults and educators? And you're developing the more of a K through 12 program, or am
Yeah,
I?
K through 12, I really want to do in the future. That's like the ultimate goal. And I'm starting now with creating accessible materials for adults, closing that adult financial education gap. So what I really want to do is create 3 free downloadable resources. We're working on getting a podcast started as well, which I'm super excited about. It's going to be so much fun. Really just meeting adults where they are and their current media consumption, because there's a lot of personal finance books out there already. There's a lot of articles out there already, but whenever you take into consideration that we live in a world that is becoming more and more and more fast-paced, maybe these books aren't accessible because you're working 2 jobs to support your family. Maybe you need a podcast that's 15 minutes long that has like the very basic financial concepts broken down in a fun, entertaining way because you don't have the mental battery to sit through a book full of jargon, a book that's very educational and very valuable, but isn't something that perhaps a burnt out, frazzled young person entering the workforce or person that has a family that they're providing for can necessarily start with. I think that if we appreciate the fact that everyone has a different step where they start from their financial literacy journey, then, for example, you can start with the really simple to understand, easy, free stuff out there from the Financial Literacy Diaries. And once you have a grip on your financial literacy journey and you start to develop some financial literacy and financial wellness, you can start to actually understand some of the books that are on the market. I think that there's a lot of financial literacy, financial education 101 stuff on the market, but I want to create that 099, if that makes sense. I want to be the place where someone can start if they're too scared to start somewhere else, or if they feel overwhelmed. If there's a guy in a really fancy suit talking to them that seems intimidating. I really want to be someone's like little sister or big sister wherever you happen to be in that journey.
So, and I'll leave the links to all this in the show notes, but walk us through a little bit. So there's some young adults who are listening to this podcast. They're hearing about the Financial Literacy Diaries. What will they find if they go there, and a little bit more specifically, how that would help them to have a better grip on and better financial literacy?
Yeah. So we are creating a blog that explains things in a very basic way, and it compiles resources that are already found on the internet in a one-stop shop. So you're not going to have to go to 50 different blogs just to find the one thing that you're looking for. We are also creating financial education resources that are printables, or you can use them digitally, such as like a SMART goal worksheet, a budget tracker, bill tracker, resources like that. And they're made in a way that's fun and engaging. So it's not even like it's not like you have a black and white sheet that's like all in Arial. There's fun colors. So that can attract people who may be a little bit intimidated to get started. And finally, we are developing that podcast. So we're going to have conversations marginally about money. It's not just going to be, here are 5 ways that you can balance your budget. It's going to be the story of how I had a balanced budget and I was in the grocery store line and realized that my credit card declined. Whenever we structure things in narrative, it immediately and in a very intuitive way captures the importance of what's being said. And it's a way to say, it's like showing rather than telling. You can tell people you should have a budget, right? It's not going to really be that effective. But if you show people the time that I didn't have a budget and I realized that I could not buy all of my family Christmas gifts, that is a really effective way of saying, here's why you need a budget without being patronizing, without being mean. It's an accessible, approachable way. And that's the purpose of the podcast. And it's going to be under 15 minutes, digestible, talk about the basics of financial literacy without diving into the weeds and without promoting products. I think that's the most important part. Yeah, there might be authors on the show, and if you want to buy their books, you're more than welcome to, but I won't be pushing paid products down because the essence of what I do is I want it to be free. I want everything to be accessible. In our economy, we live in an information age, but media literacy is decreasing. Financial literacy alongside that is also decreasing. By increasing financial literacy, we can have a more effective market economically.
And you point out specifically and in particular with the podcast, the point about storytelling. And there's a lot of information in the marketing space about how storytelling is very compelling and can be very compelling in marketing. People love a story and they love to be told a story, and that tends to resonate. So I think you'd agree that storytelling in this space in financial literacy and explaining it can be very powerful, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
you were saying because by example, you can tell people they need a budget, but if you can tell a story about someone who had a problem or didn't understand something and it caused a problem for them, you tell that story and they're like, oh, right. Then having a budget, that happened to me. And having a budget would help that not happen to me again. That can be very powerful.
Exactly. And one of the things that I started researching when I was creating this, I spent months just researching. I announced it, and then I was trying to get a minimum viable product up, but then I realized I needed to do so much more research. Adult education theory, a really big part of it is helping adults come to their own conclusions. You can tell kids, this is X, this is Y, this is Z, and they'll memorize it and they'll take that to heart. With adults, we have our own experiences. And
Mhm.
especially in the financial education space, you have some financial trauma, you have some deep-rooted emotional experiences that, yes, you can hear with your mind that you need to do something. So, for example, you can hear with your mind, you need to get out of debt, but in your heart, you might be too scared. You might be habituated. And habituated means that because you've been in debt for so long, you're used to it and it doesn't seem that bad. So, for example, if you are in consumer debt, let's say that you have $7,500 in credit card debt. You pay it down to 5,000. That feels good to someone who's been in credit card debt for a long time and maybe had $20,000 before. But then the person who doesn't normally take on debt, $5,000 might seem like a really scary number. So there's a lot of things that are relative. And whenever you try to create one size fits all financial content that is, this is X, this is Y, this is Z, it doesn't resonate with a lot of people. By creating stories, you can reach people on a deeper level. You can help them conceptualize and change that emotional element, that relationship they have with money, and it can be deeper. It goes deeper than just X, Y, Z. It's here is the whole alphabet, and then I'm helping you come to your own conclusion about X, Y, Z. And the best part about it is people can come to their own conclusions. If they have the information, they can come to their own conclusions. So perhaps they may decide that even though they are X amount of dollars in debt, they want to give their children one last good Christmas before they decide. And I'm thinking about Christmas a lot because it's almost Christmas time when we're filming. They want to really give their kids one last good Christmas, and so they decide maybe the rational thing is not for me to do this, but this is the life that I have been given. This is the circumstances that I have. I have this information. I don't need to use it tomorrow. I think that's the really liberating part about creating stories and creating accessible content that people can make their own decisions behind. Because whenever you create I'm sitting in a chair and I'm talking down to you, if someone rejects part of the message, it's making them prone to rejecting the entire message. Instead, I want people to take what they can and apply it to their own lives in the best way that they possibly can, because I truly believe that people operate based off of the information they have and they make rational decisions based off of the information that they have.
And certainly, and that your story of One Last Christmas certainly resonates with me because as a bankruptcy attorney and among the bankruptcy bar, we know that January and February are often a busy time because people have that one last Christmas before we have to deal with this. And then the credit card bill comes in January, and they said, okay, now we got to do something. So that's definitely a phenomenon and really under the category of cautionary tale and storytelling, not having a good grip on sometimes even the basics of personal finance and financial literacy can have serious consequences. There was an attorney who she graduated law school, got her license, had difficulty finding a job, so she opened her own shop and she was handling cases and she settled a case and she put the money into her trust account and then she wrote checks. She dispersed the money. But what she didn't realize is you have to wait for the check to clear before you can disperse from that account. And the checks bounced. And the state found out about it. And she's not a lawyer anymore. That mistake got her disbarred. One of the worst things you can do is have a problem with your trust account. And this woman, out of no malice, out of no greed or business um, desperation or anything else, just an ignorance of how checks work in bank accounts, lost her law license. So there can be some serious consequences there.
How tragic. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to follow up that story with the comment of how much the world has changed and how this has created an entire generation of people who don't even know where to start, right? Because most people don't even use checks anymore. I had to use a check to sign my first I started renting when I was 17. I had my first commercial space and I'd never written a check before. So I was signing and I was like, Mom, did I sign in the right? I signed where the dollar amount is supposed to go. So I
Oh,
had to redo. Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't know how to write a check, and luckily my mom was able to step in and teach me, but not everyone is in a position. Imagine if I would have been 24 rather than 17, right? I don't call my mom every 5 minutes to ask her how to do things anymore. I would have been in a completely different situation. I also think it's important to remember in the 90s, I wasn't around for the 90s, but credit cards were just starting to be marketed aggressively. So most people who were born in the 90s and earlier remember a time when not everyone had a credit card. Now we're living in a time where everyone has at least 5 credit cards. And if you don't have a credit card, like my grandmother, you're considered a Luddite, which means you're considered a person who hates technology and process and progress. So the relationship with credit cards has changed so quickly. In the span of 20 years, we went from credit cards being the rich businessmen who are going on their business air whatever, or the heiress ladies who are shopping, getting their fancy bags, to everyone having one. Everyone. And it's created this entire generation of people who don't know how to conceptualize money because money has always been this dollar amount. We don't really hold money anymore. It doesn't feel any worse to buy a $20 purse or any better, sorry. It doesn't feel any better to buy a $20 purse versus a $2,000 purse because it's the same swipe. And I know as a recent college graduate and still graduate student, I am so dependent on Apple Pay now. I use my phone for everything. And one time, this is my embarrassing story. I was at Walmart. I don't normally go to Walmart, so I wasn't prepared, but I wanted to get a recipe and Walmart was the closest place. So I walk up and I have $130 worth of groceries for this. It was like a Friendsgiving or something, so it was more than just a recipe. I digress. I didn't realize that they didn't have Apple Pay, and I stopped carrying my credit card and my wallet with me because I was yeah. So I'm just standing there, like 100. I owe these people $140. There's this line. I'm pretty sure there's a family behind me. Kids are screaming as they do because they're children and they don't understand why the line's not moving. So I'm about to just like cry. My phone's also at 7%.
oh,
Yeah, my family lives about an hour and a half away. And I just felt a lot of pressure. Luckily, my friend was there and she paid for it using her card and I immediately cashed apped her. I felt so embarrassed about it. But just getting myself into that position, I'm studying financial planning at this point. How did I manage to get myself into a position where I couldn't even pay for things? It's not even that I didn't have the money. I had enough money. I just didn't have a way to pay people. So I really think that sometimes we just get so used to the way things are that we forget, right? I am so used to just using my phone to pay for things that I forgot about the concept of having a credit card like in my hand in order to pay for something. It's so hard. Digital shopping makes it even worse. Sometimes I forget about things that I've purchased, and it's like Christmas when it shows up at the door and I'm like, I forgot that I bought this.
oh,
I don't remember buying this. It's that's one thing that I've had to work with my husband recently because when we moved, we had to buy pretty much everything. And yeah, it was crazy. It was so that is another big thing that I want everyone to understand. Even people who market themselves as an expert still have to deal with this stuff because we also make financial decisions, right? And no one is perfect. That's why I think it's so important to get involved with a community that is centered on accountability, that's centered on good financial habits, because it's so easy to slip. It's so easy to make a mistake and then get yourself habituated with where you're at. So, for example, lifestyle creep is another really big thing that I've been having to deal with right now. Whenever my husband and I got married, he got a really good position very quickly, and we started spending really, really, really quickly and justifying it with that income increase. And We realized 3 months into it, yeah, we have to quit. We really want to live within our means, because because of the military retirement, I was medically retired 3 years in. I work not because I have to. I do have some level of financial independence, but we want him to have that financial independence too. So we need to save more money. So it's a work in progress. Every day you have to remind yourself, and this comes from this behavioral economics perspective of people have certain heuristics that they fall back on. And sometimes you have to overcome those psychological heuristics that we naturally fall into. And that takes practice, that takes effort. It's like, for example, if you are trying to become more physically fit, it takes a long time to permanently ingrain a habit. So if you did not grow up running every day, and like me, I never ran and you want to start running, it's really easy to fall into not running. It only takes one day of like, well, I don't feel good. And then all of a sudden you start to slide back. There's a lot of going back and forth. And that's another thing. Sliding back is normal. There's nothing wrong with it. You hop back on wherever you start. And I think that that is another side of personal finance that I really would like to see change. It's never all or nothing. If you make one mistake, like you try again. The process of becoming first financially literate, and then financially well. It is a give and take process where sometimes you take a few steps back, sometimes you forget things, you have to remind yourself of things. And even the experts, even the people who are writing books about this, they have to remind themselves. That's probably why they started writing books, because they wanted to teach themselves these lessons and look back on things. I went to church and my pastor said the same thing. He was talking about grumbling. We learned about grumbling in church this week, and about how he has to remind himself not to complain about things, and he has to remind his children, and he's a pastor. So it really just comes down to constantly being in a state of recognizing that we aren't perfect, wanting to do better, and then surrounding yourself with the resources and the community of people who are also wanting to do better so you don't fall back into bad habits.
Right. Well, one of the other things that I've seen, at least on YouTube and some other areas of the media, with Gen Z, and this story was also kind of told with the generation before it, the millennials, the difficulties that a lot of businesses are having with Gen Z employees. A lot of times they're hiring them, and 30 days later they're firing them. And I've always seen that as not so much the problem of the Gen Zer or the millennial, but in the way they were raised and the way the parents raised them, how they were taught, and what their expectations are. So
I
what do you think is the cause of this problem, and how can it be addressed is a question I have.
I have a lot of thoughts about this as a member of Gen Z, and I'm one of the elder Gen Zs too. I'm a little bit on the older side, so I'm seeing my younger peers enter the workforce. I really think that it is this idea of not accepting a toxic workforce. I think that is first and foremost. And when I say toxic workforce, I'm not trying to say work is bad, we don't want to work, but I really think that alongside technology, there was never a culture adjustment, right? So in the past, people who were paged after 8 p.m. were very important executives. You were paid significantly to have, like, those big brick phones that you were carrying around. My mom was a nurse, and so she had a brick phone for a little bit. Normal people who were entering the workforce straight from college, they went to work and they went home. There was also a much larger culture of training in the past, because there wasn't an online tutorial that you could just slap on and have your subordinates just watch. There was hands-on training. And so if people made mistakes, there was a leader that was directly accountable for it. And there, because of that, there was a lot more accountability top to bottom. So the middle manager made sure that their subordinates were doing a good job. And from that, there was relationship building. Now you have technology. You can text your interns at 9 o'clock at night, and a lot of interns are text and email 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. In the 90s, this maybe if you were working corporate finance, getting a Harvard MBA, perhaps. But now we have regular students who are not getting compensated to the point where this level of accessibility should be allowed. And in combination with that, you have people who are expected to self-train. there's less accountability for the leaders who are training these people because it's all online. You get this online module where you watch a bunch of videos. It's pre-made, and it may have been present in the early 2000s, but now we have multimedia to the point where we're depending a little bit too much on it. That said, if you are overworking your employees and not training them properly and they underperform, it's a little bit disingenuous to blame them when they either just leave or whenever they're not hitting the performance metrics that you're expecting, and then you have to fire them. I really think that addressing the boundary setting and the lack of face-to-face training, I think that that's going to be the solution. And I've done a lot of thinking about this. Watching my husband get his internships and being called at 1 o'clock in the morning from an internship, that for me was a little bit it just really communicated what we're going through. We're also applying for up to 1,000 jobs before we even get hired on average. I shouldn't say on average, but I watched my husband 1,200 job applications before he got hired.
Wow.
You have young people getting burnt out before they're even entering the workforce. And again, it used to be, yes, your doctors, your lawyers might have been burnt out, but they were getting highly compensated. Now you have young people getting burnt out for $20 an hour jobs, for $25 an hour. This is in addition to shifting up the expected work experience to get an entry-level job. So perhaps in certain fields, you're expecting constant communication, you're expecting self-training, you're expecting accountability from the first 30 days, and you might even be paying minimum wage, which in the state of Illinois is $15 an hour.
Mm.
That I think is what's driving this disconnect and conversations with my peers, not, putting up with it in that sense. That's I think that's why you're seeing it. I know in China specifically, you have people becoming professional sons and daughters because the workforce over there is so toxic that they're not even wanting to take part in it at all. You have NEETs now in the US who are struggling to find that mismatch. And I think we should be using technology positively, so we can empower newer employees maybe to take on more than they did before, but we also need to give them the grace of being young and being new without infantilizing. I really think that these days it's either you're expected to do everything and not get the proper compensation for doing everything, or you are 24 years old and getting coffee and you're not being engaged with enough. I hope that there's a good in between. I hope that middle managers, and I say this currently pursuing a degree in business management at Geets College of Business. I hope that our new generation of managers are prepared to lead this cultural shift and also to properly integrate technology with the new expectations for the workforce. Does that make sense? I feel like I went into the weeds a little bit, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess my question too is since you're right now trying to help members of your generation with personal finance and graduating into life, is there any message you have or tips or advice you have for members of your generation, the Gen Zs or maybe the younger millennials, on what they can do about this?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
do they navigate this world? I agree with you. I think if you're talking about a $20 to $25 an hour job that isn't professional, as you said, you're not a doctor, lawyer, nurse, or some such thing where that can be expected of you, and you're being called at 1 o'clock in the morning or supposed to cancel your vacation to be a team player and come in to cover someone's shift or whatever it is, certainly toxic. What is your advice for people to try and deal with that, and at what point?
That's great. Yeah. So I really think that at this point, we are entering a workforce that is more numbers based than it used to be.
Mm.
There is always this TikTok trend on the personality hire, but it used to be a lot more people were personality hires. It's becoming a rarity. And
Mm.
so I think that the biggest thing that you can do to protect yourself is to also see entering the workforce as a numbers game. You should be making those 1,000 job applications. I mean, you shouldn't have to, but in order to fight this culture of not caring about the person and only caring about the number, you should be getting multiple job offers. That way you have leverage. Another thing is you should be also interviewing your job just as much as they are interviewing you. Gone are the days that we are trying to put ourselves out and fit into a box. There's so many companies out there, there's so many positions out there. You should understand who you are as a person and look for the type of work-life balance or the type of values that you are looking for. So for example, if your primary reason for entering the workforce is to make money, you should be asking for salary. You should be asking for salary. And if they offer you something that is not within the average range of what your position is offering, you need to not accept until you negotiate, right? They don't
Mhm.
have to accept your negotiation offer, but here's the thing. It takes a lot of time and energy to hire someone. So if you make it past the 5 rounds of interviews that's expected of you these days, they're going to have a little bit more leeway with you if you ask for 10,000 or 25,000 or some sort of accommodation in response to that because you've already made it to that point and it's going to cost them probably way more than $25,000 to interview another candidate and get to that point than it will just to hire you and to give you that raise. So knowing your worth and once you get to that position, once you have leverage, using the leverage. Don't play your cards too soon. But also if you have gone through those hoops, that's when you can start to ask a little bit more. I really wish the art of negotiation was taught more at the undergraduate and even at the high school level because I didn't have my first negotiation class until I was in graduate school. I really think that it should happen sooner because negotiation is a huge part of the job market if we're looking at people as numbers as opposed to people. And I really think that given all of these cultural things, that's what we're moving toward.
Well,
Understanding your values as a person, understanding your value as an employee and where that fits into the employer, those are all extremely important. And I honestly think for younger people, if you are looking into entering the workforce, doing research on the amount of people who are entering your degree, the success rate, understanding cost benefit analysis is really important. I really think that the days of being able to study what you're passionate about and also have a lucrative career, they're ending because people don't value education for the sake of education the way they used to anymore. Education is more seen as job training. Therefore, if you are very passionate about English, but don't see yourself as becoming an English teacher or writer, perhaps you should double major and get a profitable career just on the safe side. And that's advice that I know a lot of people don't want to hear. Everyone wants to do what they love, but I really don't think that we're moving that direction right now, especially given the competitiveness for these select few positions that everyone wants. I think that understanding your worth as a person, first and foremost, as a person, right? Because you are not just a number, you are a person.
mhm.
But then being able to translate who you are into a marketable asset to your company that you're trying to apply for. I think that's a really important skills and being able to break those apart, being able to see yourself as a number to the company, but then also in your personal life, have a rich, happy place where you have friends, family, and a great support system. So that's what I'm thinking is going to be good moving forward. Entrepreneurship's always an option too. I'm an entrepreneur. I couldn't do the traditional workforce. I tried, and I'm back to full-time entrepreneurship. So it's always an option.
I've said many times, and another attorney in my building, that we're essentially unemployable. We've been entrepreneurs, we've been on our own for so long that we could never really work for anybody else. But just to wrap
I
up,
really
I like the point that
sorry.
you make about and not doing it immediately, but maybe in the fourth or fifth round of interviews, that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you, and they need to realize that you're looking to see, is this going to be a good fit, and knowing that and knowing some more specifics, not letting them paint with a broad brush about what um, the job description is, or what the compensation is, or what the benefits package is. You don't want to be finding that out in orientation and finding out it's not what you thought it was going to be or what you understood it to be. You
And
need to
if
be
you're doing
specific
management
what you're
level
doing.
tasks, you need to
Yeah,
make management level money. Management level task, management level money. That's just
that's
how it
right.
is.
Exactly. So great information. I like what the approach that you have in talking to fellow members of Gen Z, and trying to get them into the workforce, and dealing with life after college, and personal finance, and also as a way of educating the next generation K through 12 and this sort of thing. So I certainly wish you well. We have your website. I know you provided me with some information on your social media platforms and your presence there. The Financial Literacy Diaries and your website. But it's in general, if people want to reach out to you or learn more about all of this, how can they contact you?
Yeah, so the best way to contact me for partnerships and collaboration is my email address, info@aaliyahkissick.com. And we do have some information for contact listed on my personal website, aaliyahkissick.com. That's going to be the fastest way to get a hold of me.
All right, great. Well, I'll get that into the show notes, folks, and you can take a look at that. And thanks for coming on the show, Aaliyah. I'm sure our audience learned a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.